Greetings, it's 8 o'clock here on Wednesday night. We're in week 10 of Eat Clean, Get Lean. As always, I'm your host, Mike Keenan, and I'm just going to open up my PowerPoint presentation here. And I'll give everyone just a couple minutes to come online. Tonight's topic is going to be carbohydrates. Hopefully we'll clear up a few myths of what's a proper carbohydrate and what is a carbohydrate that may be a harmful carbohydrate because of the way it's processed. It could be a fat storing carbohydrate, or it could be part of a fat burning meal carbohydrate. And just a little side note, so everyone knows, right prior to World War I, we were sending soldiers off with cases of malnutrition, and they were having a lot of vitamin deficiencies, and one of them was some of the B complex vitamins. And there's a lot of B vitamins in grains, but they were milling these grains and processing them and removing a lot of the vitamins in the process. So that's why when you look on your bread in the supermarket, it'll say enriched with vitamin B and niacin. Those were two of the ones, two of the important ones that were eliminated through the grain processing process. And we had a lot of, I remember coming up in physical therapy in the late 70s, early 80s, we had a lot of cases of spina bifida. We don't see that anymore because they realized that the reason that they were seeing so many cases of spina bifida was because of a lack of folic acid, which is one of your B vitamins. So they started to put folic acid in the prenatal compounds for women, pregnant women who were taking vitamins. What they've later found out is that half of the American people, and for what reason they're not sure, cannot properly absorb folic acid in the, well, in the synthetic phase. It can't absorb it hardly ever. People can't absorb folic acid that's synthetic. And even in the natural based, they still have trouble with bioavailability and absorbing the vitamin. So a new formulation has come out with something called folate, which is 100% bioavailable to people. So when you look for a vitamin formulation, you want to go with something that has folate in it, not folic acid. So if you have questions and concerns, of course, you know you can come to me because I have the answers to all these things because I've done the research. So I think everyone's online now, and I've killed enough time. By the way, it was an absolutely beautiful day here at the Jersey Shore. I should have been at the beach, but I was working all day. But you know what? There's an old saying, you make hay when the sun shines, and the sun was shining, so we were back in the office making hay today. But you work hard so that you can play hard, and Susan and I have some really great plans for next upcoming week. The kids are on their way to Europe, as everyone knows, on Monday. So we're going to take a little time off next week and go out and do some fun stuff, she and I. So anyway, let us move on. Week 10, carbohydrates. Now let's talk a little bit about the difference between a starchy carbohydrate and a fibrous carbohydrate. When we started putting the meal plans together, what did we say? We said in the morning when you're making your protein shake in the eat less, exercise less model, we said that we wanted to have high levels of protein, fiber, and water, right? So we certainly wouldn't put a starchy carbohydrate in that process, because if we look all the way to the left, which is the refined grains, those are your breads, a lot of your cold cereals, your donuts, your muffins, your pizza, your cake, your pie, any type of heavily processed grain, there's an awful lot of sugar in it. There's very little fiber and hardly any water. But nobody's putting donuts in a protein shake, I hope. But how about those people who get up every day and they go to the bagel shop and they get a bagel with cream cheese and a coffee, and that's their breakfast? And then they come to me later in that day and they go, I don't understand why I'm not losing weight. I'm hardly eating anything. But what you are eating is so high in sugar that you're causing a hormonal shift. You're causing it to be a fat storing mechanism. and therefore you're not able to lose weight. So that's pretty obvious there, that there's a very high sugar content in your refined grains and very little fiber and very little water. As we shift to the right, there's a little less processing. This is where we start to bring in the oatmeals and the oat brands and a lot of the more whole natural grains. But even still, you can see a huge discrepancy between the amount of sugar, the amount of fiber. Fibers come up a little bit because we left a little bit behind. We didn't overprocess it, but still very low on the water end. So when we start talking about high fiber and high water content of food, we're certainly not talking about these. Now we see the first paradigm shift, and that's in fruits. Now, fruits typically have a very high water content, but they still carry, a lot of fruits still carry a lot of sugar. Something like a banana, watermelon, melons, honeydews, pears, what are some other fruits? And of course, dried fruits are going to have a lot less water in them, and their sugars are going to be even more concentrated. Better than refined grains, better than whole grains, but still not where we want to be with regards to when we say we want a meal predominantly of protein, fiber, and water. And last but not least, we come to our vegetables. Now, we're not talking in this case about potatoes and brown rice and quinoa. Right here, we're talking about broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus, your lettuce, your romaines, your spinach, your asparagus, Brussels sprouts, like I said. This is where you want to spend most of your time dealing with carbohydrates if it's your goal to have optimal health and wellness and to help to lose stored body fat. Now, someone said to me, okay, Mike, in this hierarchy here, where do potatoes and rice come in? They're actually more a whole grain, so they're much higher in the sugar content. They're much lower in water. They have a decent amount of fiber, more so than the fruits, but they're still not where you want to be with regards to protein, fiber, and water. However, with that being said, what have we taught all along? You know, for the purpose of sleep, we certainly want to have a starchy carbohydrate with dinner because we need that extended amount of sugar to help to feed the brain and nervous system while we're sleeping so we can get a restful night's sleep. So this is where the coaching comes in, guys. I've said this now 10 weeks. You know, if you're not certain of what you should be doing, ask Susan and I for help because we're here to coach you. So let's talk about what happens when we combine fat and sugar. So here you see those delicious Christmas cookies that are loaded with butter and white flour. So when it comes to adding fat to starch or sugar being starch, the issue is that these foods are not only the most calorically dense, but they may be negatively impacting biochemistry in such a way that it causes increased food intake at the current meal and cravings for more high-calorie foods at future meals. So animal studies have shown these foods to have a hedonistic effect, causing animals not to be able to regulate their hunger and craving centers. Remember, we're always talking about hunger, energy, and cravings. These foods may be the reason behind the concept of food addiction. Eliminating these foods from the diet is often one of the most powerful things a person can do. In our experience, it takes a few weeks to break free from their spell, but when it happens, it can literally free some people from a lifetime of food struggles. So again, these foods are not this detrimental for every person, but given the issues with calories and brain chemistry, it is best to limit them or avoid them completely. These foods include things like cakes, cookies, pastries, but can also include things like pasta, cream sauces, pizza, bagels with cream cheese, French fries, and burgers. Now, if you're talking about a bison burger, okay, that has, you know, the healthy saturated fat in it without a bun and without cheese and ketchup, well, that's one thing. But when we say burgers, French fries and burgers, we're talking about your typical like McDonald's kind of setup where the French fries are deep fried in fat, sprinkled with salt and sugar, which we'll talk about later, which is like the unhappy triad of food you put salt, fat, and sugar together, you can get anybody to eat just about anything. For example, chicken fingers. Okay, chicken fingers are loaded with fat and sugar and salt. So weight gain and fat. Ironically, the potato can be a great fat loss food when eaten in its plain form, but in the Western society, it's almost never eaten this way and is instead loaded with fat and salt. We also talk about stress and weight gain. Weight loss is more than just calories. If it were as simple as calories, the obesity problem would be much more solvable. There are other factors impacting the weight battle: sleep deprivation and chronic stress. Okay, both negatively impact fat loss, even though they are in fact calorie-free. You can't eat them, yet they impact whether we store fat or burn it. They also dramatically impact our hunger, motivation to work out, and cravings. Okay, let's move forward. So let's talk a little bit about stress and weight gain. So while it's true that calorie excess is required to gain weight, just as calorie deficits are required to lose weight, it is short-sighted to pretend other factors don't impact weight gain or fat gain. There is nothing more ignorant and judgmental, in our opinion, than assuming anyone who does not get results from diet and exercise change is not being compliant, or that those who are unable to control their eating are simply overeaters who don't work out, who lack willpower, and should be yelled at and berated. Eating less, exercising more is not the answer. In fact, weight gain and weight loss is multifactorial and individual. It involves understanding individual genetics, your unique metabolic expression, psychological sensitivities, and even personal preferences. But there does appear to be some overarching themes. So let's talk a little bit about the fat gain formula. Do you want to know what that is? That's high fat along with high sugar combined with stress is a recipe for fat gain. Sure, you can get fat from overeating anything, and on that fact we can agree, except it is virtually impossible for any free-living human who gorges with chicken and greens to just do that. It won't happen. So again, high fat, high sugar, and stress. So we know that a high fat, high sugar combination has been shown in mammals to completely disrupt the normal metabolic regulation that occurs with either high fat or high sugar diets, but it's the combination. So the combination is not only a higher calorie diet, but it seems to have the impact of assuring we continue to crave high fat, high sugar foods in the future as well. This combination of these two items alters brain chemistry in such a way that it disrupts the natural ability to self-regulate calorie intake. The bottom line, fat and sugar will sabotage your willpower. So here's how it works. You have a control center for your appetite in your brain that resides in a place called the hypothalamus. And there are chemicals stimulating this type of eating. You have the neuropeptide and the gouty. Okay, so we're going to call it NPY and AGRP. There are also those that suppress food intake, and we're going to call them, for lack of better terms, POMC. So know that you have what should we call it? Enzymes, that control your ability to want to store fat and eat more, and then you have those that suppress your food intake. So think of NPY and AGRP as the feeding gas pedals. They make us hungry and make us want to eat. Think of the POMC as the brakes on food intake. So if you're wondering how hunger hormones like ghrelin and leptin figure into this, they work by impacting these chemicals. Okay, so ghrelin is your hunger hormone, and leptin tells the brain whether it's okay to burn fat or it's better to store fat. So imagine that ghrelin is going to make the NPY and the AGRP even more aggressive and make you want to eat even more. Whereas they also affect POMC in a different way and help you to stop eating so much. I'll explain a little more as we go through this. So we have two diets containing the same number of calories, can impact these hunger regulation chemicals differently. Fat and sugar combinations seem to short-circuit the hunger centers, resulting in a constant desire for food. So here you have all the high-fat, high-sugar foods on the left, and on the right, we're seeing a mix of vegetables and healthy fats. And there should be protein in that picture too, right? So let's go back to the fat storing formula for just a second. It's the high fat plus the sugar or the starch times the stress. It's fat combined with sugar magnified by stress. Stress is the cherry on top of this fat storing sundae. So if you're a savvy fat loss lifestyle or a fitness professional, when you think stress, you think cortisol. And if you're really savvy, you'll also think of catecholamines. And if you're really, really savvy, you'll think of one more hormone, NPY. Remember that one? NPY is involved with hunger in the brain. And it also is released from the sympathetic nervous system during times of stress. So stress is going to stimulate more NPY, which will make you do what? Make you want to eat more. So when you're under acute stress, you release more of the catecholamines and cortisol. When you're under acute stress, you produce more NPY. Now, chronic stress isn't just mental stress. What's something else we've talked about with regards to chronic stress? For most of us, it's long distance running. Well, long distance cardiovascular. So walking is not high stress. Acute stress is the burst training. But chronic low-level stress is going to release more of this NPY. It's going to make you want to eat more. And unlike the catecholamines and cortisol, which are mostly catabolic hormones, meaning they burn fat, NPY makes you gain fat, especially when it's around with cortisol. So, there are certain hormones that act differently when they're in the presence of other hormones. For example, when cortisol is mixed with human growth hormone, it is a very strong fat-burning cocktail. But when cortisol is mixed with NPY or insulin, it makes you store fat. So when NPY is released in large amounts, it causes fat cells to go from immature baby fat cells to full-blown, grown, mature fat cells. And cortisol makes the body more responsive to NPY. So in other words, NPY makes fat cells grow, and cortisol makes them more efficient at doing it. So the release of NPY from stress, along with the cortisol, not only do your fat cells grow, but they are accelerated by the cortisol. Confused? Let's review again. Chronic continuous stress releases a unique mix of NPY and cortisol. Cortisol combined with catecholamines, like it is in short-term stress, helps us burn fat. I just mentioned that. When the catecholamines, cortisol, are combined in a short-term burst-style training, you're going to help to burn fat. But when cortisol is combined with NPY, as it is with chronic stress, it equals increased fat cell growth. Another interesting aside about some of these studies on rats. Even when you feed mice high amounts of fat and sugar, obesity is not guaranteed. But when you add stress on top, and boom, it seems to induce obesity very easily. One final note on stress, weight gain response. Low-calorie diets increase cortisol levels and perceived psychological stress. And some researchers believe this is one of the key reasons they fail. So if you go on a low-calorie diet, the reason they fail is because of the perceived psychological stress and the increase in cortisol levels. So a high-fat diet has the same number of calories as a high-fat, high-sugar diet, has very different impact on metabolism. Metabolism adapts high-fat diet by decreasing appetite, so after a few weeks, the calories are no longer high. This explains why studies on the high-fat Atkins diet usually show a low-calorie, not a high-calorie intake over time. The metabolism adapts. But the high-sugar and high-fat combination creates the exact opposite changes in the hunger signaling molecules in the brain and results in insatiable hunger that continues. Ironically, this change is almost exactly the same pattern seen in starvation. That's very interesting. When we see that high-fat, high-sugar foods are not just simply high-calorie, but they also cause us to lose our ability to regulate and suppress hunger. They cause something called hyperphagia, which is a fancy medical term for continuous eating. And when we add chronic stress on top of this, we create the perfect fat-storing atomic bomb. So carb confusion. Carbs are a hot topic for us. Our clients are often initially obsessed by their impact, mostly because of the information overload out there on this topic. Now, eliminating carbohydrates completely is not the answer. We've talked about this many times. Manipulating the intake of them and noting how they impact your body is the way to go. So don't ask yourself if you should eat carbs, rather ask yourself when you should eat carbs. So carbs you want to eat for fat loss. Eat all the carbs from the green list of foods in unlimited fashion. These are predominantly all the non-starchy carbohydrates and low-sugar fruits, things like berries, apples, pears, and citrus. In addition, find your tolerance for the sweeter fruits and the wet starches. Wet starches are like your oatmeal and your rice, as opposed to the dry starches, which would be more like your donuts and cakes and breads. Okay. Most people who have eliminated carbs and suffer the low energy craving will notice amazing changes by adding back the wet starches. Oats, beans, rice, quinoa, among others, have amazing benefits on your energy, your hunger, and your cravings, and get you moving in the right direction. Don't let the carb Nazis convince you to avoid something that might be beneficial. These foods can certainly play a great role in your fat loss journey. So if you're skeptical, just look at the amount of wet starch Asian countries consume. They eat much more rice than we do in the Western world, yet remain slim. What they also do is eat plenty of produce and do not add excessive fat and salt to the starch that they eat. So they're not putting butter on their potatoes. They're maybe putting wasabi mustard, like I do. I usually put hot mustard on my sweet potatoes and my white potatoes. That's the way I like them. Okay, let's talk a little bit about carb tipping point, because that seems to be a question people had for us. Going to the top of the mountain, you want to stay there. If you don't eat enough carbohydrate, you're not going to get to the top of the mountain. If you eat too much carbohydrate, you go over the edge of the mountain and start putting on fat. So one, not going to the top of the mountain, what is that going to do? Well, that's going to create an imbalance in your HEC. You're going to get your HEC out of check, and then you're going to fail. Also, what happens if we don't have enough starch in our diet before we go to bed, especially? We don't sleep. We did a whole talk on just sleep. So you need to find the right amount, type, and timing of your carbohydrates so that you can get your sleep, keep your HEC in check, but also not increase your stored body fat. So there are times that you need to be what we call a food detective so you can solve this equation for yourself. So the amount of carbohydrate, well, that's kind of self-explanatory. You learned about this, and we introduced you to the detective tool we call AIM. You simply start the process following the 3-2-1 or 3-2-2 structure we gave you. Then you tweak and adjust depending on your results. This may involve raising or lowering the amount of carbohydrates by several bites or grams. Carbohydrate type, now that's a little more tricky to work with. You have to learn all the different types of carbs. There are non-starchy vegetables. Those are your greens, right? Your spinach, your broccoli, your kale. The high water, low sugar fruits, okay, and that's more like your berries, strawberries, blackberries, so forth. Your sweeter fruits, now you're starting to get into apples, pears, bananas. Your wet starches, we just talked about that. That's rice, oatmeal, and beans. And then your dry starches, that's more like your wheat flours, your pastas, bread, cereals, that kind of thing. Eat the majority of your carbs in the form of veggies and less sweet fruit, and then add other types as needed to balance out your HEC and burn fat. Carb type. One other aspect of carb type that is important is that the carbohydrate allergy potential. In addition to the types of carbs we mentioned above, there are also carbs that have higher allergy potential than others. You want to focus on low allergy producing carbs, or what we know as hypoallergenic carbs. These carbs include ones that are low in chemicals that irritate the gut or cause an immune reaction in the body. You may have heard that some people, certainly not all, as the nutritionist alarm would have you believe that we have have an immune reaction to gluten, which is present in many grains, especially wheat. Other carbs have higher amounts of lectins and saponins, which can irritate the lining of the gut and cause issues. These include grains, beans, legumes, and white potatoes. If you find yourself sensitive to these issues, choose vegetables, fruits, sweet potato, rice, and quinoa. They are less likely starches to cause issues. You have to experiment with this if this is an issue or not for you. Carb timing strategies. As they say, timing is everything. Here are a few strategies that might work for you. If you already employ one and it's working, don't be a research chaser. Stick with what works. Okay, a lot of athletes eat a lot of their carbs post-workout. Okay, carbohydrate is a major stimulator of muscle building and the fat-storing hormone, insulin. Post-workout is a great time to include carbs because exercise is an insulin mimicker. Just the act of contracting your muscles will increase the number of glucose receptors on cells like muscle cells. So what are muscle cells looking for? They're looking for fuel. They are able to take glucose in. Cells need glucose to function. To do what? To help to start up the whole Krebs cycle. Remember our mighty mitochondria? Okay, the mitochondria needs sugar along with oxygen and fat to burn to create energy. So if you have a greater number or a greater effect on the glucose receptors on the cells, you'll be able to draw more sugar into the cell. So what happens if the sugar goes in the cell and doesn't stay in circulation? It can't be stored as fat. Because once sugar gets into a cell, it can't leave. It has to be burned. It's like putting gasoline in your car and then sealing the gas tank. The only way to get that gas out of the car is to start the engine and burn it. I thought that was a good analogy. I've used that in the past. This is the same thing insulin does. So eating most of your starch after a workout allows for increased glucose uptake by the muscles, which increases glycogen storage and muscle protein synthesis with less insulin needed. Haha, so you're not secreting as much insulin. That's good. This accelerates the muscle building impact of insulin and de-emphasizes any fat storing effects. Translation, the best of all worlds. So this is a great time to have carbs, especially if muscle gain is what you're after. Do keep in mind that overloading on carbs post-workout will immediately slow fat burning down. But here's the thing that we have to talk about here. A lot of people that employ this strategy are not looking to burn fat. They're already at a pretty low percent body fat. They're looking to gain lean mass. This is your athlete, your bodybuilder, anyone who's trying to get a maximum potentiality out of their body with regards to sports or performance. So, translation again, if it's your intention to burn stored body fat, this may not be the way to go for you. But for some of my guys out there that are doing performance training, getting ready for a tough mudder or getting ready to go back and play football or whatever, this might be the way to go. Women's soccer players, they need a tremendous amount of strength in those legs to keep them running up and down the field, right? And what do? Soccer is not jogging. Soccer is a lot of sprinting. So you need a lot of strength. You need a lot of power. Eating all your carbs in the morning. Insulin sensitivity is highest in the morning after an overnight fast and lowest in the evening after a full day of meals. This means there's less of a negative impact from starch in the morning compared to the evening, with all things being equal. The morning approach may also cause some adjustment in the leptin curve, making it to start to peak in the early evening instead of the middle of the night, which can have benefits in reducing hunger in the evening. If you find you're ravenous at night, first increase your protein. If that doesn't work, try this approach with your carbs. The morning strategy works well if you prefer a morning workout or you find you're dragging all day long. It also helps if you're craving pastry and coffee. Now, let me say this. I'll give you my insight. Most people, this doesn't work for them either. If your goal is losing stored body fat, most of my people that I talk to get through the pretty much most of the day without any real problems. Where do most of us run into problems? Most of us run into problems at nighttime. that's when our hunger, our energy, and our craving goes through the roof. So this is a strategy that works for 90% of the people that want to lose stored body fat. Okay? The idea of eating your carbs in the morning is great if you're just dragging during the day and you can't function. But for most of us, that's not the case. Most of us say, Mike, I have so much trouble at nighttime. Once I start eating, it's almost like a constant feed fest from 6 o'clock to the time I fall asleep. So eating carbs before or during the meal, which you crave them, is a way to go. And again, that goes more for the nighttime eaters. Okay, let me skip ahead. Eating carbs at night. I want to spend more time on this. Carbohydrate intake is believed to raise serotonin in the brain, though the discussion of this topic has sparked some controversy. Essentially, insulin pushes most other amino acids into the tissues, leaving tryptophan, which is less competitive to cross the blood-brain barrier, raising serotonin in the process. Serotonin is a relaxing brain chemical that can aid in sleep. The other thing is having starches at night, what it can do is lower cortisol and catecholamine levels, which can be elevated at night in people who experience insomnia. The strategy also works well for those who work out in the evening and/or crave starch at night. That's me. The strategy may also curb cravings the next day. This is the strategy that works best with me, so I have my starch at nighttime. Fine-tuning the strategy. These strategies are not one-size-fits-all. Any expert who tells you otherwise is wrong. If you're at the stage and you want to tweak your approach to eating carbs further, consider the following. First of all, reduce your overall starch intake. Again, make sure that you can function with your HEC in check, but if your HEC's in check and you're gaining weight, you have to adjust your overall starch intake. Eating starches only at specific times of the day, we just talked about that. Limiting starchy carbohydrates to 20 to 30 bites per day to start. We equate a bite as 1 level tablespoon or about 5 grams of carb. So this is about 100 to 150 starchy carbs. It's easy to titrate down as needed compared to where you're measuring. So if you say, I'm just going to have 10 bites, you don't have to worry about pulling out a scale or a measuring cup. Okay, guys, that's all I got for tonight. All this is going to be available on replay. Let me get out of here. Let me go back to here. Go back to here. And I'm going to open up the chat room. And if anybody has a question, you know what, guys? It's 8:33. This works a whole lot better on Facebook. So let's do this. I'm going to shoot everyone over to Facebook. I'm going to write that in here. Go to Facebook. To chat. I'll be there for about 15 minutes, and then I actually got to eat my dinner, and I have another teleconference at 9 o'clock I have to be part of. So if you show up in Facebook in the next 5 minutes, that's great. If not, I'll talk to everyone shortly, and I'm going to tweak the next 2 weeks. I'm going to start to incorporate some new slides. So if you've heard me speak on the 3 batteries, we're going to talk about that. And I got some other things I want to talk about, but I have some new handouts and some new slides I want to put out there. So take care, guys. Have a great night, and I'll see you on Facebook.